Is it okay?
Perfect. We have you now loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this afternoon session of Expert Working Group meeting. I hope that you enjoyed the morning session. It was very enriching to hear from country representatives about their experiences in developing SDG7 roadmap. Like Mr. Belena, I'm also very pleased to acknowledge the support that ESCAP has rendered in developing SDG7 roadmap for Nepal. It was a very timely development as my government recently submitted its second nationally determined contribution. The SDG7 roadmap provided important input to this process. In this session, we are going to discuss the future direction of the roadmap development initiative, particularly in the context of the rapidly evolving energy transition and the need to further strengthen the next step tool. As such, this session has been designed with a few important presentations, followed by time for discussions. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Michael Williamson, Section Chief of Energy Division of ESCAP, to set the scene for this session. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Gautam. First of all, let me pass on apologies of our director, Mr. Hongping Lu, who has another commitment today. He's not able to join us, and he was going to cover this segment. I think to a large extent, many of the issues have already been canvassed in the morning session. As I said, the afternoon session will be rather more forward-looking, attempting to take stock of what we've achieved so far with the program and considering what might be the needs for countries as we go forward. So considering that some countries have developed a roadmap and they've expressed some further needs in terms of technical and capacity support, while other countries have not yet embarked on developing an SDG7 roadmap and looking beyond the 2030 milepost, what exists after that in terms of requirements on climate change mitigation, moving towards net zero, and of course the recovery from COVID-19. There are all many new elements in the energy landscape that we should take account of. We're very lucky to have with us some international experts who are going to present on some of these topics, and I'm sure you'll be interested to hear from them, and hopefully we will have enough time for some more discussions and feedback. So maybe I'll just pass back to the chair, who will introduce my colleague Anis to take us through the next presentation. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Michael. That gave us a good overview of the content for this session. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Anish Jaman, Economic Affairs Officer of ESCAP, to give us an understanding of what are the areas the next step tool can and should focus on in going forward. Anish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please allow me to share my screen. I believe you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see it well.
So thank you again, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor, and very good afternoon to you all. And I believe you are very much enjoying the workshop. So far, I see it has been a great workshop. We had very good session in the morning, but what I would like to say here that it wasn't possible without your participation. So a big thank you to everyone. So following on from the last few deliberations that we had in the morning, we very well understand that the energy transition space is rapidly evolving with new trends, goals, and targets. The next step tool has been doing a great job in supporting member states in energy planning in the context of SDG7 and NDC that are to be achieved by 2030. It's now the time that we look beyond 2030 and look from the perspective of the changing paradigm of energy transition and to assess how the tool can be further improved to cater for these new scopes. So with this in mind, I would like to first briefly discuss what the current capabilities of the Next Step tool are. Then point to the emerging areas that need to be considered in moving forward. We need to understand some specific issues that are important to our Asia-Pacific region for the energy transition. And finally, identify the areas that need to be considered for widening the scope of the Next Step tool. So the Next Step tool was developed in 2020 with the primary objective to support the development of SDG7 roadmaps. Accordingly, the Next Step tool was designed to develop the SDG scenario, focusing on the 3 key targets of SDG7, and which are analysis on the country or city, how they can achieve universal access to modern and clean energy services, including access to electricity and clean cooking fuel and technologies. Then assess what needs to be done to find out the optimum share of renewable energy in total final energy consumption, what level of energy efficiency improvement is needed for the country to achieve the SDG7 target. Additionally, it also develops some ambitious scenarios that look at increasing ambition beyond 2030 and just beyond just achieving SDG7 targets, but also to aim high. For example, identifying potential to increase energy efficiency above the required target level. The Next Step tool performs a thorough analysis of the power sector to inform the optimum generation mix that support all the targets for SDG7. In addition to the technological assessment, the Next Step tool also performs an extensive economic analysis to inform on parameters such as total investment costs, including investment needs shown by year and technologies, net benefits, etc. The tool also offers some other useful information, such as the marginal abatement cost curve, levelized cost of electricity, and an analysis of on better recovering from COVID-19, which is done rather on a limited scope. An energy sector is responsible for over 70% of global emissions, and therefore it was not possible to perform an analysis only on SDG7 without considering emission reduction targets such as NDC. And therefore, NDC was also integrated in the methodology. In fact, as you may be aware that the renewable energy target under SDG7 does not have a quantified target. The Next Step tool uses the NDC target to estimate the share of renewable energy. So for NDC, the tool first produces the BAU emission scenario, which is an important thing to do as most NDC targets are compared with the BAU emissions. It then presents changes in emissions under different scenarios in alignment with its emission to 1.5 degree pathway. And finally, it identifies potential for enhancing the current level of NDC, considering both conditional and unconditional targets. Now, looking at what the emerging trends for energy transition are, we will hear more details in the coming presentation, so I won't be going into much details. Starting with the coal phase out. Now, I think the base question and the first question is going to be, why do we need to think about phasing out coal? Bulk of the global use of coal for power generation is in the Asia Pacific region, and it is growing fast. Analysis suggests that to keep our emissions in line with the 1.5-degree pathway, our region needs a complete phase out of coal by 2040. Also, the economic risk of investment in coal are increasing fast. Not only that, renewable-based power generation is already cheaper than coal-fired electricity, and that is even without considering any externalities, but also investors worldwide are withdrawing their support on coal. Big banks and insurance underwriters have announced that they won't support any new investment on coal. Also, it is very likely that the investments in coal will lead to stranded assets in near future. However, the transitioning away from coal is not an easy task. Policymakers need substantial analytical information to make an informed policy decision. And those kind of information would need to include, for example, what are the benefits of transitioning away from coal, not only in terms of the environmental benefits, but also social, such as health, jobs, and most importantly, economic benefits. How does the cost of coal-fired power generation compare with the alternative technologies such as renewable energy-based power generation? And how these costs are likely to change over time, given that power plants have long lifetime? What are the risks of such investments? They also need to know the cost of transitioning to renewables and how the financing gaps can be bridged. It is also important to know what are the potential sources of financing that would support such transition. Finally, coal has been a big industry in most countries, and phasing out coal may impact severely if not done in a planned way. We need to follow the just transition mechanism that minimizes the impact on economy and the society. In the current version of the Next Step tool, a limited level of analysis on recovery from COVID-19 is done. However, there are scopes for further widening the assessment, such as to include how the GDP will change over time due to the pandemic and how this will impact on energy transition. Decline of energy demand, not only due to the pandemic, but also due to the digitization of meetings, activities, which is leading to less transport activities. How economic stimulus packages would impact on energy transition investments, how more jobs can be created to prevent the impact on the economy, and how to better estimate savings from the energy sector to really invest in other critical sectors like health. The net zero carbon, we all are seeing the recent development in this area. The world is moving fast on the plan for net zero. I think the COP26, which is happening in a few days, is going to emphasize this even more. Our region is home to the bulk of the global population and consumes the most energy. Without an active role from the Asia Pacific region, the net zero plan is not going to work. So we need to prepare ourselves for the rapid decarbonization, because we like it or not, eventually this is going to happen. It's very important that we prepare ourselves early. Our delayed action would certainly put a huge dent on our economy due to possible trade restrictions, and we will see a severe impact on the job market as well. Energy storage is critical to support the rapid uptake of variable renewable energy technologies, in particular to the grid integration of renewable energy technologies. Our region is in the early development phase on the large scale use of energy storage systems. Policymakers need to take an active role to develop enabling policy measures in support of energy storage systems. Several information that can help policymakers to make an informed decision. These include what are the technical options for energy storage systems. Currently, we know that there are many, but detailed technical information is really lacking at the moment. The cost database for different technologies and cost estimation of renewable energy with storage packages would be very helpful. We need to know how the cost of renewable energy with storage compare with fossil fuel technologies, how energy storage system can support critical grid factors such as rapid response, voltage and frequency support. We may also need to develop grid codes to allow energy storage system in the grid. Electrification of the transport system is another area that demands a greater attention. Its benefits are multidimensional. Not only it reduces reliance on petroleum fuel and reduces emission as well as air pollution, electric vehicles are a great mechanism to support renewable energy integration in the grid. It can serve as a storage by storing surplus electricity during the off-peak and as a power source to supply electricity during the peak time. Like other areas, policymakers also need to know some detailed analysis to support the uptake of electric vehicles. The analysis should inform, for example, how different categories of internal combustion engines would need to be phased out. This will particularly ensure that we start with older vehicle fleet and then work towards the recently added vehicles to avoid any significant financial implications. Of course, we need to take a detailed assessment of costs and benefits, but we also need to look at the life cycle analysis of carbon emissions. Some other activities like policy dialogues, knowledge sharing events, as well as leveraging the regional cooperation would be beneficial to develop a better plan. So with these points and based on the discussion that we had in the morning and also will be having soon, here are some areas along which we think the scope of the next step tool should be widened. And these are a deeper analysis on COVID-19 recovery, supporting countries and cities to develop their net zero carbon plan, including energy storage systems as an integral part of power sector analysis, national and subnational level analysis on electric vehicle uptake. There may be more areas that we need to include, and we'll be happy to hear some thoughts from you in the discussion session. Also, please feel free to let us know if you would be interested in supporting any of these areas, because you might have already existing expertise or experience or some other activities that are currently going, which would be very helpful to support some of these areas that I just mentioned. So with this, I will stop here and I will hand over the floor back to the chair. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you're on.
Thank you, Anis, for those insights on what additional feature would be good to include in next step in going forward. I agree that economic recovery from COVID-19 is a critical aspect that we need to explore, how the sustainable energy transition can support the process. Moving towards net zero is also an important direction for the post-2030 energy planning. We are fortunate to have a few experts among us from renowned organizations that have been actively working on future directions that Anis has mentioned in his presentation. It would be a pleasure to hear their views. First, we'd like to hear from Mr. Charlie Haves, the Energy Modeling Program Director of Stockholm Environment Institute. Due to the time zone difficulty, Mr. Haves has sent a pre-recorded video message. I would like to request the Secretariat to play the message.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just play the video from my side. Just 1 second.
Hello everybody, my name is Charlie Heaps. I'm the Director of the Energy Modelling Programme at the Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm also lead developer of LEAP, the Low Emissions Analysis Platform. I've been asked today to give you an introduction to some of the new developments coming with LEAP in the next year or two. Here's an outline of the presentation today. I'm going to start by giving you a quick introduction or a quick recap to the LEAP and NEMO energy modelling systems. I won't go into a lot of detail here because I understand that many of you are already familiar with LEAP and I know it's been used by UN ESCAP as part of its next step process. So instead I'm going to focus on 4 main areas of new developments. So in particular, how you can use LEAP to model ambient and indoor air pollution impacts, modeling net zero pathways in LEAP, a new macroeconomic modeling tool for COVID-19 recovery planning called the Recovers tool. And finally, I'll talk about some coming developments, a roadmap for what you can expect to see with LEAP in the next year or two. So first, a quick recap. What is LEAP? LEAP is a Windows-based tool for energy planning and greenhouse gas mitigation assessment that's been developed over the last 30 or so years by the Stockholm Environment Institute. It's now been very widely applied in at least 200 countries and territories, and many countries have also used LEAP to help develop their nationally determined contributions, their contributions to the Paris climate planning process. LEAP is a scenario-based modelling tool that explores how emissions may change in the future under a range of alternative policy scenarios. For example, it allows you to compare baseline projections against projections of alternative pathways such as low emission development scenarios. Typically, LEAP is used at the national scale, but it also works for cities, regions, and for multi-country analyses. It's primarily focused on energy sector greenhouse gas emissions modelling, but it can also be used for modelling non-energy sectors, for example, industrial processes, solid waste, forestry, those kinds of things. A very important point about LEAP is that it's not just about modelling and algorithms. It's really a complete decision support system. It includes a lot of capabilities to help you manage data, to document your analyses, and also to visualize results and interact with stakeholders. So it's really a full-blown decision support system. A related tool is NEMO, the Next Energy Modeling System for Optimization. So NEMO, which is also developed at SEI, NEMO is a fast optimization modeling engine that works closely with LEAP for least cost planning. And NEMO is really a foundation for many of the future improvements that we're planning to LEAP. Both LEAP and NEMO are available at no charge to governments, NGOs, and academics in low and lower middle income countries. And it's also available at low cost to users in upper middle income countries. So now let me mention some of the coming developments with LEAP. And I'm going to start by talking about assessing air pollution impacts. So recent versions of LEAP have included a module called IBC, the Integrated Benefits Calculator. IBC is designed to assess the avoided health and climate impacts arising from climate and ambient air pollution mitigation measures. IBC works with national and regional scale LEAP models, and it's so far been calibrated to work for about 120 countries, with additional countries coming soon. The IBC and LEAP work together as follows. First, base year pollutant concentrations are derived either from LEAP's own emissions or from satellite-based measurements. National emission scenarios calculated in LEAP are then combined with rest of world emission scenarios from the IASA GAINS Eclipse scenarios, and these are used as input to a global atmospheric geochemistry calculation, which is based on the GeoSchem joint model. This calculation results in population-weighted concentrations of secondary pollutants for each target country. And then the final step is that concentration exposure response functions, which have been developed for the Global Burden of Disease study, are then applied to those population-weighted concentrations in order to calculate overall premature mortality impacts. And then there's a number of additional functions in IBC that calculate ozone-related crop losses and climate-related impacts in the form of expected temperature change at different sort of regional bands. And you can see some of the results over there on the right-hand side, showing you, for example, sort of the number of deaths and the sort of avoided deaths based on different scenario measures. All of the data and the calculations occur within LEAP, so you never actually have to go outside of LEAP to make use of IBC, and the results are calculated quickly and they can be visualized within LEAP as well. So so IBC deals with sort of outdoor or ambient air pollution, but the latest version of LEAP, LEAP 2020, complements those calculations by also looking at the health impacts from indoor air pollution. So the approach for indoor air pollution is based on the Household Air Pollution Intervention Tool, HAPIT, which is a tool developed by the Clean Cooking Alliance, and the methods within it are very closely aligned to those used by the WHO when it calculates the impacts from household air pollution. The methodology in LEAP accounts for likely levels of exposure from various cooking technologies, and it examines the impacts on different household members. So specifically, it divides sort of a household into the cooks, the other adults in the household, and the children in the household. And it also distinguishes between male and female members of the household. The approach uses the same concentration exposure response functions used in IBC, and it also includes methods that avoid double counting impacts due to the overlap between ambient and indoor air pollution. So obviously some ambient air pollution is itself caused by indoor air pollution or caused by cooking technologies that are used indoors. So it's important not to double count those impacts. And as with IBC, all the data and results are shown directly within LEAP, and they can be disaggregated by disease, by age, and by gender, making them highly relevant for studying pathways to achieve sustainable development goals. And you can see some examples of the data inputs over here on the right. You can see here we're sort of exploring measures for replacing traditional cooking with clean cooking. And then below that, some of the results that you can see. So for example, there's results showing you sort of the avoided deaths in a clean cooking scenario versus a baseline scenario, and it's showing the impacts divided down maybe between by gender, by age group, and by the disease that causes the premature mortality. So now let me turn to the topic of net zero modelling and how you can do some of that in LEAP. So the 2021 UNEP emission gap report has recently noted that all countries need to make their net zero plans more concrete and need to rapidly begin putting them into action. But the task of planning for net zero is challenging. It requires fundamental changes to our energy and economic systems, and it may imply large changes in how we use land as well. So LEAP can be used to help support such planning. In particular, within for the energy system aspects of net zero planning, LEAP and NEMO already support many capabilities that are useful for net zero planning. And I won't go through that whole list that I've put down there, but for example, you can look at high penetration of variable renewable energy in power systems. You can look at the implications of energy storage and transmission power flow modeling. You can do very detailed time slicing, so you can examine how you can allow for high penetration of variable renewables, and how you can maybe make use of technologies like energy storage to support the high penetration of variable renewables on an energy system. And you can see some of the results over there on the right hand side. For example, here we have a chart showing you power generation in different seasons and different hours of the day. You can see there's some hours of the day when we've got excess supply from our variable renewables, our solar and our wind, and then there's maybe other hours of the day where we don't have enough power. So we're sort of brokering that by using energy storage to move power from one time slice to another. So those are the kinds of things you can do on the in terms of electric sector modelling of net zero. But you can also look at other topics, for example, how to use hydrogen within an energy system, how to model stock turnover of high levels of electric vehicle adoption, and how to model negative emission factors for technologies like carbon capture and storage or direct air capture. I should mention also that we're continuing to improve LEAP and NEMO to allow them to support other crucial facets of net zero planning, and I'll mention some of those on the next couple of slides. For example, modelling of land use and forestry, and to provide greater insights into topics such as transmission planning and production cost modelling. So those are all areas where we're improving LEAP to make it more useful and to give greater insights into the challenges that need to be overcome for net zero planning. So next I want to mention a new tool being developed at SEI called Recovers, the Rapid Economic COVID-19 Response Simulator. Recovers is a new software tool developed at SEI that is designed to analyze the impact of COVID-19 recovery on economic baselines, and it's intended to generate climate and energy planning scenarios that include the economic ramifications of the pandemic. The tool allows exploration of different public health measures. For example, you can consider topics such as lockdowns, social distancing, testing and tracing programs, and travel restrictions. And Recovers can be adapted according to national circumstances. It's also intended to be used closely in conjunction with tools such as LEAP. So for example, you could use Recovers to develop your GDP forecasts that could be the basis of your planning in LEAP. Recovers also allows planners to explore alternative scenarios for global trends. For example, what might happen with GDP, infection rates, and public health measures. Recovers will be released to the public by the end of the year, and we'll post an announcement about that on the LEAP website. Finally, I want to mention some planned new capabilities for LEAP coming in the next 2 years. So firstly, let me start with plugins. So LEAP will support this, the concept of plugins. Plugins are mini models that will be developed by subject matter experts, and which can be maintained in online repositories and integrated into LEAP very easily. Plugins will make LEAP development easier and more modular, and they'll provide users with new methods and better geographically appropriate default data. A related concept is this idea of internet data links. So these will be a new system for linking LEAP models directly to internet-hosted databases. So this will simplify data entry and data collection, and it will allow users to easily update their models whenever new data becomes available. So these data links will connect to standard data covering energy, emissions, and development topics. For example, the UN population prospects, the UN energy statistics, the EDGAR emissions database, and the World Bank World Development Indicators. We're also planning on making a lot of data that we've already developed ourselves at SEI, making that available via this data link facility. For example, we've developed some good default emission factors that we'll make available. Thirdly, I want to mention the topic of land use change and forestry, LULUCF. So LEAP already includes methods for modeling biomass energy demand and supply, but we plan on building on that in a future release to more fully support greenhouse gas mitigation modeling in the land use change and forestry sectors. This is a really important topic, especially for many tropical countries where those sectors are really important for their greenhouse gas planning. This new capability will include tracking of carbon emissions and both above and below ground carbon stocks. And the methods we're developing very much will be guided by the IPCC greenhouse gas inventory guidelines method. Next, I want to mention the topic of energy system optimization modeling. So optimization modeling in LEAP is currently limited only to modeling least cost planning for a single sector. For example, the electric generation sector is the one most typically applied. So NEMO already supports full energy system modeling, but that kind of capability isn't yet supported in LEAP. So that's something we're planning on bringing to LEAP in the next year or two. So at that point, you'll be able to optionally have the whole of the energy supply system modeled via optimization methods. Next is the concept of LEAP for the web. So we're developing a new web-based portal which users will be able to use to host the results of their LEAP models to make them easily accessible to stakeholders. So you'll be able to publish your LEAP results to a website and make them interactively accessible to stakeholders. The website will allow stakeholders to access all of the various different results currently produced in LEAP. So as you probably know, it can produce all sorts of different reports, charts, tables, maps, map curves, energy balances, Sankey diagrams, and all of those things will be available to people browsing on the web without the need to acquire a LEAP license or without the need to install LEAP. And then finally, I just want to mention one further area of development. We're currently updating the user interface to allow it to take advantage of the new high resolution monitors that are becoming available. So this will allow for much richer information display. This new version will include new high res icons and an optional dark mode, which I know a lot of people like working with. So that's it for some of the planned changes to LEAP coming in the next year or two. Thank you very much for your attention. If you'd like more information about LEAP, please visit the LEAP website, or please check out the LEAP community on Facebook. And there's also a huge amount of resources, lots of training videos available on the LEAP YouTube channel. Thanks for your attention. Bye for now.
It was great to hear how the energy modeling technique is trying to include the COVID-19 recovery. Thank you very much, Mr. Hibbs. Now I would like to invite Ms. Arceli Fernandez-Pele, Head of Technology Innovation Unit, Energy Technology Policy Division, International Energy Agency, to give us an overview of the carbon neutral plan for China that IEA has recently developed. Mr. Pale, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for the kind invitation for us to participate in this very important workshop. And let me just pull a couple of slides to guide my presentation. The topic I wanted to bring to the discussion today was a recent report that we've developed that is being called an Energy Sector Roadmap to Carbon Neutrality in China. And this has been a roadmap that at the IEA we have developed in response to the invitation from the Chinese government to cooperate with us and to engage in developing long-term pathways towards carbon neutrality in response to the government pledge. And so we at the IEA have used the modeling capabilities and experience that we have, and we have collaborated very closely with stakeholders in the country, ranging from financial institutions like Energy Foundation China, as well as universities like Tsinghua University, Peking Normal University, and others, as well as energy research institutes, social academy for science, etc., etc. And so it's been a long but as well an interesting project that we wanted to illustrate today. And just to mention, perhaps before going quickly through the key findings of the project, that indeed at the IEA, so we have modeling frameworks that cover the whole energy sector of the world with different regions. We have around 40 regions, maps, and characterized in quite a lot of detail in that modeling framework. And that framework includes both simulation and least cost optimization tools as well. So just making some notes and echoes from the previous presentation. So to put a little bit in context, the results that you will be seeing today as an aggregation of all the capacities, again, that we have at the agency to respond to these challenges, both ranging from mapping and understanding what's the current context of the energy sector in different regions, as well as what would be the new challenges when it comes to technology development, to energy security, to operability of new energy systems, as well as affordability. So let me just get started more now in a bit more detail on the roadmap for China and some of the key findings. And just before I may start with a bit of quick context. Of course, you may all be aware that as of last year, with the announcement of the carbon neutrality pledge from the Chinese government, the country embarked into a journey, a 40-year journey actually, towards carbon neutrality to reach that ambition before 2060. And that happened at a point in time where actually it was around 40 years as well since China started its reform and its opening up, which has shown an impressive transformation of the country that has had impacts as well at the global level. We've seen, for instance, in terms of GDP growth over this past 40-year period, that China contributed with a quarter of that growth that we've seen at the global level. And that has led to lift out of poverty hundreds of millions of people. This has led to have China becoming the largest economy in GDP in terms of PPP terms. So, of course, all that impressive transformation come to, in a way, the expense of bringing in and expanding the energy sector really massively. This impacted all the different fuels. If we look, for instance, at the growth in terms of coal demand over the last 40 years at the global level, we see that more than 80% of that growth was related to demand in China. At the same time, even if China still is the largest coal demand user behind or just followed by India, what we see as well is that at the same time, China has been the key market for renewable electricity deployment, particularly solar PV and also wind. Around 35% of the capacity additions that occurred during that last 40-year period took place in China as a result of ambitious policy instruments and targets. And if we look at the oil segment, we see a similar pattern. We've seen that today China is the second largest oil demander or oil user in the world, just followed by the United States. And over this last 40-year period, we've seen that around 55, so a bit more than half of the oil production increase in that period was to fulfill the demand that came from China. At the same time, we've seen as well how China is the leading market for electric vehicles and also for manufacturing of batteries that will go into that type of application. Already today, China holds more than 70% of the manufacturing capacity for batteries for electric vehicles. But of course, when we look at climate change, the key metric that matters is CO2 emissions. And what we see is that certainly China has contributed quite significantly to the growth in emissions that we've seen over the last 40 years. Today, China is the largest CO2 emitter in absolute terms. It already overtook on a per capita basis Europe around 10 years ago. And so I think there's no, let's say, doubt that, of course, a credible pathway towards reaching carbon neutrality at the global level will really need to embark and encompass the transformation of China. Now, if we looked a bit again quickly to the past, of course, this massive transformation of the country over the last 40 years and the expansion of the energy sector, despite this, let's say, good progress in terms of technologies such as electric vehicles, particularly in the car segment, but also in terms of renewable electricity. Despite those progresses, we've seen that essentially the main force to expand the energy sector in China has been fueled by fossil fuels. Today, the energy mix in China is clearly dominated by fossil fuels, with them represented more than 85% of the mix. And when we look forward and we see what the pathway towards carbon neutrality and the transition could look like, we will need an important and massive transformation of the way we produce and we use energy. And such transformation is of the pace and of the scale of what we've seen in the past for fossil fuels, but this time for low carbon. Just to give a couple of pointers for reference, when we look at fossil fuels, we see, for instance, that coal demand will drop more than 80% by 2060 compared to 2020. Oil demand will drop by around 60%, and 45% reductions is what we see for natural gas. Another important factor to consider is all the transformation of the electricity system. Certainly, we see that solar will become the largest energy vector in the Chinese mix by 2045 in that pathway. And another important pillar would be energy efficiency. Energy efficiency will need to be the first priority across the board in all the different sectors and applications, not only to do with existing or let's say conventional technologies, but also with those that are emerging and could be deployed further in the years to come. And we see that the total primary energy demand by 2060 in China will be around just around 10% lower than what it is today, but it will be fueling an economy that will be 3 times larger than what it is today. So again, a big push for energy efficiency across the board. And another key aspect to highlight is electrification. We see this as a key strategy again, and electricity becomes the largest fuel in final energy terms already before 2030, overtaking coal again in that pathway. Now, how to, in a way, achieve that transition? We've seen the results in the transformation of the energy mix, what would be the implications there, but what are the underlying levers, the underlying technologies, the underlying strategies that will drive such transformation? So, well, the conclusion here is that there's no difference compared to other regional contexts in the sense that such deep transformation to reach net zero emissions will require a broad range of solutions and technologies, and there's no one single one that could be making the whole, or will be bringing us there. And so we see that in a way, in the near term, we can have a lot of progress already as a result of measures and technologies that are available on the market today, and that in quite some cases are already cost competitive. So to 2030, we see most of the emission reductions coming from curbing the use of coal across different applications, as well as, again, deploying strategies that are available on the market today. If we think about energy efficiency, as I've mentioned, if we think about a more efficient use of materials, if we think about further stimulating the electrification of transport and other areas, as well as, for instance, accelerating as well the deployment of renewable electricity generation. But what happens as well is that when we look in the longer term, so towards 2060, in this case, to meet this goal of reaching carbon neutrality, we see that there are areas in the energy sector where we don't have today available on the market at large scale technologies that would allow us to provide those services at the low emissions footprint that would be required. Particularly, we think about heavy industry, which has an important weight in the Chinese context, or we think about long-distance transport, if we think about shipping or aviation, even trucks. And so to tackle that issue, of course, we need to work in developing technologies that would help us resolve those challenges. And actually, in our analysis, we've identified that around 50% of the emission reductions that will be required by 2060 would come from technologies that are not available on the market today. Now, we see as well at the same time that China is in a very privileged position to tap into the opportunity of developing these technologies and bringing them to the market, considering that it has already increased by around 70% its public spending in energy R&D over the last year, since 2015. Lately, the startups placed in China have been absorbing around 1/3 of the capital mobilized for early stage venture capital deals. And of course, we see as well, there's an important track history and experience in China in terms of setting up pilots and demonstration zones and different municipalities and provinces that would allow to create these niche markets to stimulate demand for these technologies. We've seen as well an increased efforts over the last years in terms of technology collaboration and around innovation more internationally. For instance, China is part of quite some of the technology collaboration programs that we have established at the IEA with researchers and experts around the world working on these technologies. But not only that, we've also seen that there are specific steps and tangible changes that go in this direction. We've seen in this 14 5-year plan in China that for the first time, the demonstration of large-scale carbon capture and storage projects have been included in that document. And also, for instance, in another important area of technology, which is hydrogen, we've seen how, despite the fact that there's no still a national-wide hydrogen strategy set up, there are many provinces and municipalities that are either announcing or have already developed their strategies. If we think about Jilin, Hebei, Shandong, but also the municipalities of Shanghai and Beijing. So there's clear signs in the direction of transforming as well the economy system and going towards an innovation-led and service-led economy. Now, of course, what I've presented so far is the analysis we've done in terms of like what could be the pathway that would reach carbon neutrality before 2060 as pledged by China, but also fulfilling their stated goals that the government has put forward. And this means that in that pathway by 2030, we'll see emissions being at a level roughly slightly higher than what we see in 2020. However, we think that through our analysis, we've seen that China has the technical capacities, it has also the policy experience and also the economic means to do a faster transition to 2030. A faster transition that would put basically a peak in CO2 emissions around the mid-2020s, and that could then put this emissions trajectory into a decisive decline before 2030. And that faster transition would be based on accelerating this reduction in the demand of coal, incentivizing further energy efficiency and a more efficient use of materials, and accelerating the deployment of clean energy technologies in areas where those are already available on the market today in this first period. We think that faster acceleration of that faster transition of the transformation of China could have wider benefits, not only those related to climate change, because of course lower emissions could be put into the atmosphere, but also wider environmental benefits, such as a faster transition in terms of air pollution mitigation, as well as socioeconomic advantages related to employment, and also related to this, let's say, plan in a way, or strategy, again, to shift the economy towards a more innovation-led growth, as it would stimulate more rapidly the development of some technologies and the associated implications for the society. If I just pick the employment metric as a point of context, just to give a bit of, to put a bit more in tangible terms, what we mean about these additional benefits, of course, we see that the transformation overall, no matter what would be the specific trajectory, would pose some challenges. We've seen how a shift from fossil fuels towards lower carbon energy sources would imply a loss in jobs related to the exploitation and the processing of these fossil fuels. But at the same time, we see very important gains in terms of jobs creation for really creating this new economy. And not only development, but also manufacturing and operating these new technologies that will come to the market. If we think about, for instance, energy efficiency retrofits in buildings, if we think about all the electric vehicle value chains, if we think about all the transformation in the electricity systems, etc., etc. Now, what we see is that in this faster transition pathway, we see a similar effect, but much more widened. So the net positive effect in terms of job gains would be larger. We'll be talking about 1 million additional jobs by 2030. And again, on the other hand, the challenges wouldn't be necessarily greater. We'll see how, of course, both trajectories would incur in additional investments compared to a baseline pathway, but the overall level of investments are equivalent, are very similar, and actually both trajectories lead to a pathway in which there's not only job gains, but at the same time the required investment on a per GDP basis will be lower compared to what we've seen in terms of investment over the last years in China. Of course, there's the factor, very important aspect to consider, which is that the location or in the places where those jobs may be lost across the country may not be located in the same areas as where those jobs could be created. And that's an important consideration for the government to grapple with, to make sure that there's a just and an inclusive transition to make sure that jobs are transferred in the adequate way by minimizing impacts. And with that, let me just run through a very quick slide for conclusions, where just want to highlight some of the key messages. Indeed, as I've mentioned, China has been through an impressive transformation over the last 40 years. This has led to important developments in the country, but that have also changed the world. At the same time, this transformation has been particularly fueled by fossil fuels, but there's been also an important positioning of China in clean energy technologies, in batteries, in solar PV. And so China has now become a clean energy powerhouse at the same time. China's carbon neutrality pledge certainly demands a profound transformation of the energy system, and that will result in growth in clean energy technologies in the coming decades that would be equivalent to the pace and scale that what we've seen the country took or undertook for fossil fuels. So they've proven that such transformation could be possible. An acceleration of that transformation, so reaching a peak in CO2 emissions by the mid-2020s with a 20% reduction by 2030 in terms of emissions, compared to a trajectory that would be compatible with the stated goals of the country. Basically, we've analyzed that is not only possible, but also beneficial, bringing in not only a more orderly transition, but also resulting in almost 1 million additional net jobs created by 2030. And we see that actually China has many strengths and is very well placed to successfully achieve such transformation, demonstrating its leadership in technology, in energy policy, and international collaboration. Of course, could be an essential pillar that would need to be stimulated to make sure that those goals can be achieved. And I will leave it here from my side, just to mention that first, just quickly included the link to the report that is fully available on our website with all the information, the analysis, the results underlined, fully available as well. And from the IEA, we just remain open and available at the disposal of all the government countries for providing support in fleshing out and discussing their strategies moving forward. So thanks again for the presentation and for the invitation. Apologies, and yeah, just a pleasure to join. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Pale, and congratulations for completing such an important report. I'm sure many participants will want to know more about this work. In line with what has been discussed since the morning, ESCAP aims to develop an analytical report highlighting the works that have been completed thus far and the direction that this great initiative would need to move along. Among us, we have Professor David Harris, who has been supporting ESCAP in developing this report. The report aims to review the roadmaps that have been developed, conduct bilateral discussions with the country focal points, and incorporate the key takeaway points from this expert working group meeting. I'd like to invite Professor David Harris to give a short presentation on the initial finding and outline of the analytical report. Professor Harris, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all. I listened with a lot of interest to the discussions this morning from the various member countries that have had roadmaps completed and their comments on how useful.
Professor Harris, you are not audible. Could you please increase the volume?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
No, I cannot hear.
We can hear you. Maybe you can come a little closer to the mic.
Can you hear me now?
It looks like the volume has decreased a little bit.
Can you hear me if I don't wear this microphone?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Okay, look, thank you very much. And I thank you all for this morning's presentations. I listened with much interest from the member country representatives talking about their experience and their views on the Sustainable Development Goals 7 roadmaps that have been completed and are available to date. I've been asked by ESCAP to review, help ESCAP with a review on the process, really to pause and ask, the essential question is, are there any ways that the roadmaps can be improved and be made more useful, particularly in terms of informing and changing policy and planning? I've already read, Anis, can you scroll down? I've already really gone through the 10 roadmaps that have already been produced to try and understand the effort, the data, the methodology, the recommendations that are made and how they're made, the least cost analysis, the policy analysis, very detailed work that's gone into them. The next step for me, though, is to try and understand how useful these roadmaps have been for each of the member countries in terms of helping them or assisting them to now go forward and put those sustainable development goal and carbon neutrality goals into effect. If you can go down to the next slide. These roadmaps obviously require significant time and effort and resources, and that's both from ESCAP team and also from the member states, gathering a lot of data, the coordination between the different agencies. And I think it's therefore very sensible decision on ESCAP's part to pause and say, let's just look at what we've done to date, how we've done it, and start thinking about, are there any ways of improving this process? So that's the purpose of what I'll be doing. And to do that, I will be really wanting to talk to as many of you as possible of the member countries that have completed these roadmaps to date, to understand their experiences and their views on the usefulness and any input they could have into how they think it might be tweaked or changed to make them more helpful for those member countries and putting these all this amazing amount of data and modelling into effect. Next slide. I've reviewed all of the roadmaps to date, including the methodologies, and what I'd now is to look and try and do an assessment of their effectiveness. And I'll be then completing this with a desktop study to determine how and if more of the emerging policy issues need to be or could be integrated into these Sustainable Development Goals 7 roadmaps. And as we've seen, they include COVID-19, which have already been covered to some extent in the roadmaps, but also hydrogen and so on. Next slide. I've prepared an inception paper and submitted that to ESCAP with an outline of the paper that I will, in my final report, in which I list some of the critical issues and questions. Today at the workshop, it's been very useful in listening to representatives from the member group countries to understand their views, particularly on the usefulness and the aid that has a useful guide this has been. I will further review the roadmaps and then conduct one-to-one virtual interviews with representatives from the member states for which the roadmaps have been completed. I think, given the differences between the member states in terms of their energy sectors, in terms of the difficulties or challenges in meeting the goals and the net zero emissions, my strong suspicion is that it'd be useful for me to interview with each of those representatives from each of those 10 member states or regions. That will be completed with a desktop study and which I'll then prepare and submit a final analytical report with any recommendations for changes that should be made to the process, the roadmap process. Next slide, Anis. Timetable I've developed. So today we're at the 28th of October. So over the next month, I hope to be having virtual online interviews with those representatives from those member countries. My approach will be to really, it's a open-ended interview. I'm not a strong believer in hard quantitative type of surveys. I really want to dig down and really get to the bottom of how difficult, how challenging was it, what were the issues encountered by the member, trying to put myself in the shoes of those member countries, trying to understand how difficult it was, how useful it was, and any tweaks that they consider might be made that would be useful. I hope by the mid-December, the plan is by mid-December to submit my final report to ESCAP. Okay, next slide, Anis. Some of the critical questions as I'd like to be asking, these are only some of the questions, and I'd really be hoping that on virtual interviews will open up the door to more questions. So it'll be an evolving discussion. I want to understand how complex and difficult the task has been for member countries, and to what extent other policy issues such as the goals have made this a more complex task. One of the rationales is that this is a very complex issue and they're all intermingled, interrelated, and that adds to the complexity. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of the perceptions of just how complex and difficult are these issues seen by the member country representatives. Next slide, Anis. Again, I'd like to understand what issues were encountered by the representatives, the member countries. How difficult was it to obtain all the data? How long did it take? To what extent were all the relevant agencies and utilities involved, and how difficult was that, and time consuming and resource consuming? And to what extent has the roadmap development been aware of other studies and plans being undertaken in parallel? For example, you have electricity supply authorities or companies undertaking studies of how to make changes to their grids to be able to accommodate more renewable energy, energy storage, and so on. Have these roadmaps been done in parallel, but taken into account those other studies being undertaken? Next slide, Anis. We've heard from Charles Heaps just how powerful a tool LEAP is. It's pretty impressive. But I guess one of the things we need to understand is we have certain inputs going into this model, and it is a model, it's a computer engine. You put data in and it runs algorithms to come out with results. And are those inputs sufficient to provide meaningful results? So how easy is it for member countries to now take these results and plug them into planning and be confident in them? Is data accurate? For example, levelized costs of energy technology used. How accurate are those costs? What's the perception of the various stakeholders? The next step includes a multi-criteria decision analysis tool, which ranks their recommendations at the end. And I'd like to hear from member countries how useful they consider that ranking of the recommendations to be. Next step, next slide, Anis. Anis, next slide. We've heard a lot about COVID-19 plans and the extent to which they overlap with Sustainable Development Goal 7. And the roadmaps already include, to some extent, a discussion on how the various recommendations work with and can meet some of the COVID-19 recovery plan goals, or is there capacity to further integrate the COVID-19 recovery plans and bring that closer so that those who are implementing the COVID-19 recovery plans have confidence in the recommendations relating to COVID-19 coming through these Sustainable Goal 7 roadmaps? And what are the other emerging issues that overlap with Sustainable Development Goal 7 roadmaps that also need to be integrated? We've heard of hydrogen and battery energy storage. Are there others? And okay, next slide, Anis. Okay, that's it from me. At this stage, it's really letting you know what I'm about to do, but mainly it's hearing from the representative countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harris. It is now time for an open discussion on the future direction of the SDG7 roadmap development program and how to better equip the next step tool to solve that purpose. To moderate this session, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Anish Jaman of ESCAP. Anish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're going to start the discussion, but before going there, I just have one short presentation to make. So this was something in relation to the capacity building, which Michael mentioned earlier in the morning. So just please allow me to share my screen. So, dear participants, say you understand that capacity building has been one of the integral part of the entire roadmap development process. And we have done this in various stages throughout the process. We have provided training to stakeholders on the Next Step portal use, which has been done for each and every country and city that we have worked with. We have involved stakeholders throughout the process, starting from the data compilation, validation, data input, and also the review of key results and findings, as well as the roadmap. So they are kind of familiar with with the whole process. However, we understand that at this point of time, in the beginning, ESCAP is supporting countries and cities to develop the roadmap, but it should not be the continuous process where ESCAP is always need to support the countries. Rather, stakeholders, countries and cities should be able to continue updating their roadmap, monitoring the progress, as well as making any adjustment. And overall, they should know how to develop the roadmap. So with this thing in aim, we have developed an online capacity building module, which includes the entire process and step-by-step guidance on how to do it, and it is available for free to everyone. So with this, it gives me a great pleasure on behalf of the Energy Division of ESCAP to really launch this e-learning capacity building platform. And I must acknowledge here that a big support was received from the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT, near Bangkok, who have supported the development of this portal. So a big thank you to AIT. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. I just will try to give you a quick overview of how you can access it and what you can do and how that look like, maybe just a couple of minutes. The e-learning portal is available at this site, so you can, I will also put this address into the chat box so you can easily copy and paste on your browser. When you come to this site, you will be seeing two sections, as you can see at the bottom: Sustainable Energy Transition Roadmap Development and also SDG7 localization. So SDG7 localization is another part where the similar kind of e-learning module has been developed. So you will be going to the left one, which is Sustainable Energy Transition Roadmap Development. And when you enter there, you will be probably coming to this web page, where you will see, one second. where you will see the name of the module, and also there is an enroll button here, so you should be able to enroll. But I guess before doing that, what you will need to do, you will have to register or sign in. So if you have already registered, then you will need to sign in. But if you haven't registered for the first time, so you will have to sign up here. And once you sign up, you will get your password and your account activated, and you will be able to log in with that. Once you enroll for the module, you will come to this page where you will see there are 10 modules. So from 1, 2, and 3, and so on, you will have 10 modules, and each of them will be shown in this way. So as you will be for the first time, there you will see not attempted, each of the modules showing not attempted, but you would be able to launch the module to go through the module. So when you launch a particular module, you will come to this page. So this is the cover page here, you can see, and the later pages will be like this. So you will have the navigation buttons, previous, next, you will have pause and play, and you will have a speaker to put your volume up or down, also full screen mode, so you will have. So once you complete your module, for each topic or module, then you will see on the summary page that particular module has been completed and the others are incomplete at the moment. So you will have to do this one by one and complete all the 10 modules. Once you enroll for that one, then that will come under your My Learning part of the web page. So every time you don't have to really go through all the process, you log in and then you will see your My Learning page, and under My Learning you have the module that you have enrolled for, and you can see it is in progress, and you can also resume from where you ended last time. So that's all about this e-learning program or tool. If you have any question or comments, please feel free to send it to us, escape-energy@un.org. All right, with this we come to the question and discussion session. So basically we have about just less than 40 minutes for our discussion. And just one second. Okay, so for this discussion, in this part of the discussion, we're going to focus mainly on the future direction, the emerging trends of energy transition. We have learned from a couple of presentations in the past, and we are going to discuss more on what we need to do to really help our region prepare sufficiently to embrace the changes that are coming forth. This discussion doesn't need to be really concentrating on member countries only, but we have experts here today. And one of the key objectives of this workshop is really to hear from our experts to what is the direction, what needs to be done, what can be done. Also, I am sure there are many experts here who are doing some activities and who have already expertise. So we would really like to do things in collaboration. So we need your support to move forward. So as before, please ask your question, put your comments, and provide your advice, suggestions, and just participate in the discussion. If you can do so by raising your hand, clicking on the raising your hand button, you can write your question in the chat box. So either way, please do so. The floor is open now. I think Michael mentioned in the morning that it's always the first question is the hardest one, so who is going to go first? But please, excuse me. Okay, I can see a hand up from, okay, I just have to see the name.
I believe it's Margalita from Georgia, just judging by the Georgian script.
Okay, so yeah, Marita, the floor is yours. You feel free to turn on your camera and yeah, when you speak.
Yeah, thank you so much, and Anis and dear colleagues. And first of all, thank you so much to this meeting. It was a real great and morning session about roadmap 7, SDG7. It's very important, and as you are aware, Georgia's and prepared and road SDG7 roadmap tool is very important, and for us, because and in the near future, all information will using in the policies and like and NECPs and like and other energy policies and climate change and so on. Of course, as regards now, I would like to introduce some brief information about transport and issues. And Georgia is currently upgrading, expanding its transport infrastructure, which includes a growing national expressways and system, new railroads, international airports, and expanded sectors and terminals. At the same time, a legislative approximation and with the EU in the field of the transport countries, and which is a priority issues in the process of Georgia integration and to EU. Low quality of service, outdated and logistics and infrastructure and equipment and inefficient supply chain and management, as well as a lack of workforce and organization and qualified and staff are in incomplete and list of the challenges in the field of transport and logistics. Share of the transport in energy consumption is a big, which is heavily dependent on fossil fuel, which is 100% imported, that hampers and reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions and achieving in Paris agreements and goals. Efficient and transport and logistic system and create opportunities and benefits for economic and social and developments that led to a number of the positive effects and such as increase and access to trade, education, employment, and additional investment. Based that in terms of the improvement in ecological situation and promoting and supporting the use of the low and fuel and bike vehicles and electric vehicles, for example, encouraging the use of the electric vehicles in the distribution sector is important. Unfortunately, there is a limited information regarding an electric vehicle from the perspective of the legislative and strategic and research level. Through there are tax examination for electric cars of national level. In this regard, and deep dive and assessment of the challenges and opportunities to reply the increase in electric vehicle to inform and relevant policy development would be a good solution to promote an electric vehicles and increasing and both publish and stakeholders awareness. As a result, we can have an analytical and publication summarizing and technological, institutional, and policy mechanisms to facilitate the uptake of the electric vehicle, as well as in policy brief, and highlighted the policy measures that will help create an enabling environment for increasing the uptake of electric vehicles. In opinions, this will be very important starting and point to support and promoting electric vehicle, which at the same time will improve local air quality, reduce reliance on the imported and petroleum fuel, and to support in increasing of the local renewable energy technologies. It was a brief information from my side. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Anis. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marita, for your insights on the electric vehicles, particularly in relation to reducing reliance on petroleum fuel for Georgia. And as you mentioned, it is fully imported. I think the case is also the same in many other countries. Marita, I know that you might have to leave soon, but just a quick question on that. Do you think the government is particularly planning to put in some mechanisms, or government is really looking forward to some cooperation or technical assistance on how to do it?
Yeah, Anis, thank you so much. And I think in cooperation, it's very important. And we think also Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development thinks, and this is priority subjects for the ministers. And of course, and cooperation will be very, very and useful and for us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marita. So much appreciated. I can see just let me see. There are some questions in the chat box. So one of the questions I will just read now. This is a question for Marcela from IEA. So I'm not sure whether she is still there, but a question from Sabar Hashim from Energy Division, Prime Minister's, I think PM's Department, Malaysia. So he's saying, I follow with interest on the presentation by IEA's Ms. Arceli on China, and just wonder why there is no citation on contribution and role of nuclear energy in that presentation. So it's really an interesting question. Not sure whether Ms. Arceli is still with us. Probably not. So yeah, Mr. Hashim, so we'll forward this question to her and we'll try to get a response from her and probably we'll share with you. Michael, I can see your hand up. You would like to take the floor?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. I just wanted to mention on the nuclear issue, in fact, as we've done our roadmaps, I'm just ticking over in my head the countries that we've done. I don't think any of the countries that we've worked with have had nuclear in their portfolio. So it's not an issue that we've had to manage in terms of where nuclear fits into the energy mix. What I would say based on observation is that nuclear seems to either have slowed down or maybe its expansion has not gone at the rate that has been forecast in recent years. And also, based on some recent construction of nuclear power, there have been significant cost increases, which are owing to kind of increased safety requirements. And so the uncertainty and unpredictability of the final constructed cost is a big barrier. So I note with interest the question, and we'll certainly pass that on to Ms. Araceli in IEA. But certainly China does have existing nuclear. And in terms of the net zero, where does nuclear sit in that picture? That's a very important question that we'll try and get an answer to somehow. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Anis.
Thanks, Michael. So that would be really great. We'll get in touch with Ms. Arceli. So there is another question from Tania Urmi from Murdoch University, Australia. She's saying, I'm not sure if I missed this. You have mentioned energy sector emission reductions and incorporating new technologies. What is your plan on including the manufacturing sector for process emissions reduction, such as cement, photochemicals, steel, etc.? I think I will have to answer this question. So the answer is that in our previous roadmaps, it's true that we haven't really considered much the process-related emissions. It's mainly because we didn't have sufficient data to include in the analysis. And also we didn't know that whether that has been significant because there is no data. So what we have found out, we have doing one of the new roadmaps, and we have found that there is a significant process-related emissions, and we are going to take this into consideration. But this is a good point. I really appreciate that. I think we also need to include that in some countries, this could be a significant source of emissions. So thank you. Please feel free to ask any question, provide suggestions. So anybody, anyone who is participating today, if you would like to share what you are doing in relation to the emerging trends that we have already discussed, it would be really wonderful to enrich our knowledge. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Mandal, you want to say something?
Yes. This is Neeraj Chandra Mandal, Deputy Secretary,
Yes,
Power
please.
Division, the Government of Bangladesh. Thank you me for giving me the opportunity. You know that Bangladesh is a country of limited land. I am audible?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Limited land, and most of the land are used in agricultural purpose. If we want to generate 1 megawatt electricity for solar from solar power, we need about 3.5 acres of land. 3.5 acres of land. Can ESCAP take initiative for research and development to invent efficient and effective solar panel or technologies so that we can produce solar energy by using a limited volume of land? Am I clear?
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you for your question. That's a very interesting question, and I very much am aware that this is a big question for Bangladesh, where the land availability is very poor. Unfortunately, ESCAP won't be able to take part in the development of the efficiency of solar cells, but there are some emerging areas, emerging technologies. For example, you might have heard the name of floating solar. So if the water bodies that are not as used for any other purposes, or even the hydro reservoirs that you have, their solar photovoltaic systems can be installed on those to generate sufficient electricity. Of course, rooftop is another area that you can explore. I think Bangladesh has already done some installation on the rooftop, but there might be many other buildings which have roofs and without any solar. So those are the areas where we can install more solar. But certainly, it would be a great pleasure to get in touch with your office, and maybe we can have some bilateral discussion on how ESCAP can support in progressing towards more sustainable energy future for Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have another question in the comment box. Is what is the temporal resolution of the ESCAP model? Do the roadmaps consider the spatial dimension in countries and cities? And great work. Not sure if I could clearly understand this question, because we are not using the GIS tool. So we are not working with the spatial dimension. So we are taking the data and inputting into the analysis of the tool platform. We haven't really explored that area. So GIS is another area which probably would be useful. And I think Charlie Hibbs in his presentation mentioned about some of the ideas of the using that will be using GIS. So we might want to see this matter at that point of time when we include those features in our next step tool. Michael, I can see your hand up. You want to take the floor?
Yeah, thanks very much, Janice, and sorry to take the floor again. I just wanted to round up a couple of issues with the previous intervention from Bangladesh. First of all, I think Bangladesh is a fascinating country for energy analysis because it has a very different setup to many other countries. It's got a big energy demand going forward. And I know that it has cancelled a lot of its coal proposals in favor of gas. It's also planning to import clean energy from Bhutan and Nepal via, cross-border links. So there's a lot going on in Bangladesh and a lot of potential. And we'd really welcome the opportunity to work with Bangladesh on an SDG roadmap because I think it would be a fascinating case. So Bangladesh has a lot in common with, in fact, Southeast Asian nations. I mean, you look at many parts of Southeast Asia, they face similar constraints in terms of space. When we look at solar potential, people often talk about the technical potential and then the economic potential. There's probably also the socially acceptable potential. So in terms of Bangladesh's land area, this is a real issue, but there are other countries in the region who are doing a lot of things that are very clever, such as floating solar, which can not only sit on hydro reservoirs, it can sit on fish farms, shrimp farms, aquaculture, and even, I think as Dr. Tanya Urmi pointed out, on agricultural settings. So in Australia, they put it where their sheep are grazing and brings lots of, in fact, benefits for agriculture. So there's a lot that can be done, and this is part of the reason that we do try to share best practice examples. But my message to Bangladesh is that, we certainly know many of your colleagues very well through our Committee on Energy, and we really would love the chance to work together on some deeper analysis into the Bangladeshi energy system. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Anis.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mr. Mandal, sir, for your nice question. And we would be happy to have some bilateral discussion going forward.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much you are very right. Bangladesh has a good regional, sub-regional cooperation with Bangladesh, has bilateral cooperation with Nepal, Bhutan, is also India. Now Bangladesh is importing power from India, and Bangladesh has a bilateral cooperation with Nepal to produce, create hydroelectric power in power plant in Nepal. In also Bangladesh has a good bilateral relation between Bangladesh and Bhutan. We are trying to establish more renewable energy from outside of Bangladesh. That is regional cooperation. We are trying in this regards. As Bangladesh is a flat country, it is very less possible to store hydro energy inside the Bangladesh. That's why Bangladesh is trying to establish bilateral cooperation with Nepal and Bhutan as well as India. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words. Those are really useful to know. One of the areas that the next step tool, I won't say lacking, but hasn't really explored is the social dimension. So, energy is one of the key areas which can empower women and also reduce poverty and create jobs, improve health. So these are the areas that we haven't explored yet, but maybe in future that's something we can look at. And I know from our colleagues at even environment program, they recently had launched a report on renewable energy for women. So I'm not sure whether we have the colleague from here, from UNEP here, and it would be great to hear a few words of how that on that particular issue. So do we have a colleague from UNEP? Let's see.
Hi, Anis. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, yes.
Hi, Anis. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for bringing this very important issues on how to create more job opportunities and gender equality in energy transitioning and green recovery. So recently, under one of our projects, which is jointly implemented by UNEP and UN Women, we are trying to see how renewable energy can be used as a tool for women entrepreneurship creation and for climate resilient livelihood generations. And under that, of course, we are trying, and we in 3 countries we have done lots of scoping and feasibility studies and identified number of women entrepreneurs and the livelihood options which can be powered through renewable energy. And through this, we are able to create somewhere around 100 women entrepreneurs across 3 countries. And we have also developed number of guidebooks, tools, training programs, and training modules, which can be used as a skill development programs for other countries to follow. We have also created a kind of financing mechanism for providing more access to finance to those women entrepreneurs who can then access those loans and finance and implement their own businesses. So of course, I can share that the link of this program for participants to know more about this program. And we are really looking forward for more partnership through ESCAPs with other member states, and see if we can have some joint skill development or those kind of things. And also to see how these social aspects can be integrated in this kind of tools to make it more widely disseminated. Thank you.
Thank you, Parimita. Thank you for sharing those words. Thank you again. There is a question. Okay, let me see. There is a question from Mr. Harris. Some countries have programmed to phase out coal power plant to achieve net zero emissions. Any specific program from ESCAP to accelerate support member countries to achieve this target? Michael, can I pass this question over to you?
Yeah, thanks, Ennis. It's a good question and an important issue. I think the phase out of coal is a really challenging issue because on one hand, if you look at the economic data and the climate data, it doesn't really make sense. But on the other hand, it's happening. So there are other factors at play here in terms of why this sector is expanding against expectations. There's a number of possible explanations. I think the energy markets have changed very rapidly in the space of 5 years. So it may take some time for institutional decision making to catch up. But nonetheless, we have pressed this message extensively across the region. We've had a series of country roundtables where we've had discussions and invited international experts to really raise the level of awareness about the risks of stranded assets and the risks of a carbon-intensive development pathway. There's a lot more that we can do, and we do have some plans. We're intending to do, so we did a flagship study last year in partnership with Climate Analytics, which really looked at the macro picture across Asia Pacific, overlaying the coal development plans with kind of the climate story and pointing out the incompatibility between those two. What we'd like to do now is go in a lot more narrow focus and look either at specific countries or specific issues. And one particular issue is about the financing and financial risks associated with coal. So certainly there's a lot more that we can do, but we remain a little bit optimistic because what is happening is that coal projects, coal pipelines are shrinking, projects are getting cancelled, and this is a momentum that we wish to continue. The environment going forwards for coal is very constrained, particularly because of the financing. It's seen as a riskier investment, so risk premiums are going up, and many countries and institutions are actually reducing or cancelling their programs to finance coal outside their own countries. So it's an important issue, but there's a lot more that we need to do on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. We have been, most of the roadmaps have identified that universal access to clean cooking fuel is one of the greatest challenges, and many countries are working on this, but we know that most of the countries do not have energy, this particular issue in their energy plans. But some countries have made some development compared to more than other countries. So I was just wondering whether there is any country, I think that in the morning Fiji shared their experience, but any other country or anyone else who would like to really shed some light on this, if any progress is being made? You can also mention about any research that you have been doing. Okay, I don't see anyone on this particular issue, but there is one more question in the chat box, I think from Adrian Pano. There are many changes occurring concurrently. For example, introduction of EVs, electrification of cooking, growth of urban areas which are coupled, impact on each other. Can ESCAP play a role to model and provide a higher level overview of these issues for efficient development? Michael, are you ready to answer this question, or you raised your hand for something else?
No, I was just going to hazard an answer at that question if I could.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so first of all, welcome Adrian. Adrian is actually from the Asia Pacific Network of Energy think tank. So it's a group of academic and research institutes focused on energy across the Asia Pacific that ESCAP has put together. And Professor Atul from University of South Pacific had joined in the morning. It's quite late in Fiji now, so he had to drop off. But a warm welcome to any other AppNet members that might be taking part. So this really comes to the heart of the issue, the fact that across the Asia Pacific, as we work on SDG7, many of the same solutions come up again and again. So there's common solutions. The challenge we have, I suppose, is the diversity of national contexts and settings, or the strategy for implementing those technologies or what mix of technologies is going to vary. I think the SDG7 roadmap has been a very interesting process from our point of view, because we see many of the same opportunities come up again and again, but the precise, I guess, policy prescription is going to be different in each case. So certainly there is more work to be done in sharing a lot of these new technologies like electrification of cooking, how you introduce EVs. And the answer to that question is different depending whether you're in Fiji or whether you're in Australia. There's very different issues at play. What we are trying to do maybe is start with a series of country studies on some of these issues, and then try and bring some of those country studies to a common platform and bring together a range of different national representatives to discuss the studies and really try to extract some national lessons. It would be nice to see something like, for example, an Asia Pacific EV strategy, but this is quite difficult to organize because there are so many different issues at play. So EVs are a very interesting one, where there's the role of government policy to kind of create the infrastructure for the charging, also to encourage the manufacturers to bring the vehicles to each particular country and support them so consumers have choice, but also to implement public transport electrification, which is something that the private sector maybe can't do or citizens can't do. It's really up to government to put this in place. And then, of course, there's the impacts on the electricity grid, both benefits and drawbacks perhaps that need to be managed. So you can see there are layers and layers of issues at play, which are really quite complex. But we certainly have our eyes on these issues, and we really appreciate the feedback we're getting from meetings such as this one as to how we can make our analysis more forward-looking and more sophisticated. Thanks, Anis.
Thanks, Michael. So we have one question from Department of Planning and Cooperation, Ministry of Energy and Mines from Laos. The question is, in case of Laos, if solar power plants are considered to cover a part of the daily load, could LEAP assist in this kind of modeling? Maybe I will answer this question. So the answer is yes, certainly it can do. So if that's kind of analysis that you would like to see, maybe we can use LEAP. And if there are support that you would be needing, we can get in touch and we can discuss this further. And if you have the capacity to model in LEAP, then it's certainly a thing that you can go ahead with LEAP. So yes, the summary is that yes, it can be done. Right, we are very close to our time, but just I wanted to raise one very important point, is that and when it comes to energy efficiency improvement, one of the measures that came repeatedly in most of the roadmaps is the introduction of minimum energy efficiencies performance standard, MEPS. Now, this is why this came up repeatedly, because it's the modeling says that it is low cost, so the government doesn't have a very high cost to implement this. It brings up or it provides a large amount of energy saving quite easily, and it's applicable to most of the places. Now, despite these advantages, we haven't seen many countries really have this MEPS included in their energy policy or already being implemented. Some countries may have. So it would be really great to hear from any country that we have here today who have implemented, and it would be good to hear their experience. And if any country, there are many countries, as I said, it would be good to know what are the limitations that you haven't been able to really implement this in your country. And certainly we also be interested to hear from any non-country representatives or from other organizations. If you have any research on this particular direction, would be interested to hear as well. So is there anyone who would like to share any thoughts, feedback, experience? Okay, among the countries we have developed the roadmaps. I think what we have seen, Vietnam has implemented to some different forms, but not fully the MEPS, but it has been kind of modified under the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act. If our Vietnam colleague is here, maybe he can provide some information. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, looks like we do not. Our colleague has left. So Michael is saying MEPS for government is treated as a zero cost measure because it is just a regulatory intervention. This makes it low cost. Yes, that is true. All right. So I think we are close to our session time limit, and it is afternoon in most of Asia, and maybe some even late for some other participants. So I won't drag it further. With this, I will end the discussion session here, and we'll pass the floor back to Mr. Chair for closing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Anis. That was a wonderful discussion session. It was great to see comments and suggestions on the future direction of next step initiatives. There are a lot of points for the Secretariat to compile in the workshop proceedings and share with the participants. It was a great pleasure for me to chair this session, as well as to learn about the direction that the energy transition is heading to. I fully agree that we need to look beyond 2030 and better prepare our region to embrace these changes. Governments need to step up their efforts to transform their national energy sector in line with these upcoming changes. Regional cooperation is a great way to strengthen the capacity of national governments and to understand the shared responsibilities. It is now time for us to wrap up and close the meeting. May I now invite Mr. Michael Williamson to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Leknathji. That's really nice of you to chair us and steer us through so efficiently through the afternoon session. It was a real pleasure to interact with everybody throughout the day. Hopefully it wasn't too tiring for people. That's why we split it up into 2 sessions. We really appreciate the dignitaries who launched the session this morning, the Under Secretary General of the UN and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Honourable Minister from Fiji and Honourable Ambassador of Nepal to the Kingdom of Thailand. We really appreciate your setting the scene. Everybody put in a lot of effort. I think it was an excellent group. The microphone discipline of this group is the best I've ever seen. So no live microphones throughout. Very, very good connections and everything was extremely clear. I thought the 2 international experts from Stockholm Environment Institute and IEA really added a lot of new flavor to this discussion, and that was also very, very valuable. So I think you've given us a lot to go forward with as we take next step to the next level, I guess, in terms of analysis. But what I wanted to leave you with is the 2 big issues that loom large in our mind. I think the first is the issue of climate change, because as we know, from reports like the one that was issued this week by UNEP, the Emissions Gap Report, the delay and lack of progress in aggressive reduction of emissions really makes our task harder in the coming decades. It means that we're going to have to ramp down a lot more steeply and adopt technologies much more quickly. It would be better if we had a gradual path, but this, I guess, delay, what it really means is that the energy sector has to step up to the plate much more into the future, because it is energy that is the key driver of emissions. So as we look beyond 2030, we can look towards a future where decarbonization is a really much more pressing issue. The second thing that I guess is occupying our thoughts as we think about next step in its future is the COVID-19 recovery, because for most of us, this is a once in a lifetime experience. We've never had this type of economic or social disruption before. It dwarfs everything else in our past history, including the Asian financial crisis or the global financial crisis. And really it's about turning this into an opportunity. And the opportunity is to marry the necessary economic recovery, which we're going to have, with the deployment of clean energy technologies, because this is a perfect combination. If we turn the clock back to 2008, when we had the global financial crisis, the renewable energy sector probably wasn't quite ready. The costs of solar and wind were not at a point that they could really be rolled out at very, very large scale in response to this economic rescue imperative. But now they are. I think we've seen the costs come down. So this is the perfect opportunity to do everything we can on clean energy, whether that's more efficient buildings, retrofits and upgrades, electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, renewable energy across the board. This is the real opportunity. And if we miss this opportunity, I think it won't come around again. So this is one thing that we really want to focus upon as we go forward with a lot of our programming in the energy division. So with that, I see that the time is coming up for 5 minutes past the hour. We really appreciate your contributions to this meeting, and we look forward to working with you again in future meetings. My colleague Serena has just reminded me that we require to do an evaluation. So we would very much appreciate it if you would snap a picture of the QR code and fill out the evaluation before the end of the meeting. But from now, from us in ESCAP, thank you very much for your participation, and we look very much forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you very much.